Welcome to the church family that is lifting lives through living love, inspiring hope, filling with faith, and transforming our world. These recorded messages are made available so that you might have additional opportunities to stay connected with us and that you might learn and grow in your faith. God bless you as you hear the word today. And now, the message.
Genesis 32:22 through 32. That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across a stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched, as he wrestled with the man. The man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It was because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and as he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. May the Lord bless the reading and the hearing of his word.
Today we're going to be kicking off a new sermon series about blessing, the art of blessing. You may have noticed as you came in, the biblical blessings that are along your pews. So I don't know if you made note when you came in what the biblical blessing that you chose this morning was. So we're going to be talking about the theme of blessing, and this idea of doing a series around blessing has been rolling around in my head and in my heart since the beginning of the year. I read a book by John Ortberg called Soul Keeping. And the middle section of the book is entitled, what about the soul needs rest, and the soul needs gratitude, and the soul needs freedom, and the soul needs satisfaction. But the chapter that stood out for me was the one that said, the soul needs blessing. That every single one of us craves blessing. Our souls need blessing. The way that the earth needs the rain, the water of the rain. Like, we just need blessing. And there's a particular sentence that stood out as I was reading that chapter. John quotes his good friend Dallas Willard, who said, "Churches should do seminars on how to bless and not curse people." And I thought, that's right. We should be doing seminars about what it is to be a blessing to others. What if all Christians learned how to bless and not curse? Wouldn't we be in a much better place? That's what we're going to do for the whole month. We're going to talk about how do we live as blessings to others. I was thinking about the very beginning, the very first covenant that God made with humanity was with the covenant God made with Abram. And when he made the covenant with Abram, he said, "I will bless you and make of you a great nation. I will make your name great so that you may be a blessing." This is God's desire. He pours out blessings on us, not so that we get to hoard them for ourselves, but so that God's blessings would overflow in our lives, that we would each be vessels of blessing to the earth and to the people who live around us. God calls us to be a blessing. So what do you think of when you hear the word blessing? How do you define that word, blessing? I mean, a lot of us, the first thing that comes to mind is, it's that thing we say right before we have a meal. God is great, God is good, let us thank him for our food. That's a blessing. Or it's the words we say right after someone sneezes, "Bless you." Or sometimes, if you live in the South, it's the words you say right after you insult somebody. For instance, "She has no taste. Look at the clothes that she's wearing. Bless her heart," right? Or, you have that neighbor, "Look at the dandelions in his lawn. He has no idea how to take care of his lawn. Bless his heart." And we think that if we say, "Bless your heart," I grew up in the South, so I know how this works. It's like, if you say "bless their heart," it cancels out all the bad things you just said before. Same way, I experience people say "no offense," and whatever's coming after is going to be very offensive, but it makes it okay if you say "no offense." Anyways, Or sometimes we think of blessings as material things. You know, the homes we live in, or the jobs we have, the technology we possess, or the vacations we take. And that does get us a little closer to what the idea of a blessing is. Those things can be blessings to us. But when I talk about blessing, when the Bible talks about blessing, it's talking about something that is deeper and richer than just material blessings. In fact, material blessings in some ways can become a curse if they become an idol in our lives, if we put them before God. So I'm going to borrow words from John Ortberg. I like the way he defines blessing. He says, a blessing is the projection of good into another person's life. The projection of good into another person's life. He goes on to say, he says, true blessing requires, that means that our will, your choices, your mind, your thoughts, your feelings, your body, your behaviors, your habits, all of these things are aligned for the good of their entire being before God. That's what a blessing is. It's just when the entirety of who we are seeks the good of someone else before God. That's what a blessing is. He goes on to say that, we have two basic postures that we can take towards people. The posture of blessing and the posture of cursing. When I say cursing, I'm not just talking about swear words, although that is a form of cursing. And I'm not just talking about like the extreme examples of cursing, like getting a voodoo doll and putting pins in it to curse someone. Like a curse is anytime you cut another human being off, or any part of creation off, from your care and your compassion. It can be the flash of anger you feel when you're suddenly wronged by someone. It can be kind of smoldering resentment and jealousy. It can be, the cold shoulder of indifference, just the shrug of indifference to someone else's hurt or pain. Or it can be those moments, we've all experienced it, when you take delight when someone you don't like fails. That's cursing. Two easy examples that I can think of. First off, I think about referees. You ever been in a game and the ref makes a really bad call against your team and you see the fans shouting at the refs? They're not saying, "Bless you, refs." They're usually saying something else that I shouldn't repeat in church. Or I think of the other example, I think it was when you're driving and the person in front of you cuts you off or does something boneheaded and dumb. In that moment, you're not blessing. Like when you honk your horn, you're not, "Bless you, bless you." That's not what the horn means, unless it's like 3 times. Bless your heart, right? Like, baby, bless your heart. You don't know how to drive. No, it always, those are times where we are just, intrinsically, we are wired to curse at those moments. The other day I was driving on 3rd Street between Sycamore and Oak, that little stretch of road in town that, let's just say that is not an avenue of blessing, is it, right? Because people don't know when to turn or how to behave. Anyways, and so I was behind this car and the bumper sticker on the back read, "I hope something good happens to you today." And I thought, I don't normally find blessing on this little stretch of road, but that is a blessing. It's the projection of good into someone else's life. I hope something good happens to you. I also thought that's a really good way to ward off honking from other people, because you don't honk at someone who's saying, "I hope something good happens to you," right? But that captures the sentiment of blessing. But that's not real blessing. That's a bumper sticker. It is the projection of good into someone else. But remember what Ortberg said, that true blessing requires all of our thoughts and all of our feelings and all of our wills and our bodies and our actions, the entirety of our being focused on someone else. So blessing doesn't mean a whole lot when it's impersonal, when it's just general, when it's cheap. Blessing acquires meaning when it is direct for you, when it is personal. And so today I want to talk about a person in the character, a single character, who was thirsty for blessing. His name was Jacob. Now, we heard Jacob's story towards the end of his life when he wrestled with God, but let me give you the backstory of Jacob's life in case you don't remember it from Sunday school. Jacob was born the second of twins. His older brother was older by a matter of seconds. In fact, the Bible says that as Esau, his older brother, came out of the womb, Jacob was grabbing onto his heel, like trying to, get ahead. And that's where his name comes from, Jacob, because in Hebrew, the word for heel is akeb. And so he was grabbing onto his brother's heel. Jacob became his name. And for the rest of his life, for the rest of his childhood, he's always trying to get ahead of his brother, who he lives in his brother's shadow, because his brother is big and strong and hairy. He's a man's man. I think of him like Gaston in Beauty and the Beast. Like, no one hunts like Esau. No one cooks like Esau. Like, he's this guy's guy. And Jacob, meanwhile, is slender and smart, but the Bible says he was more comfortable among the tents, which is a way of saying he was more comfortable with the women of the household. That's where he felt comfortable. To throw the kicker off in this little quick character study in Genesis, it closes it this way by saying Isaac favored his son Esau. He loved Esau, but Rebekah, his mother, loved Jacob. So from the beginning, Jacob just wants his father's blessing. Not just for his approval and affection, although you can imagine his soul is thirsty for his father to love him the same way he loves Esau. But he also wants the blessing because the blessing in this context, in this way, in the Hebrew families, it represented inheritance and birthright. Like, the brother who gets the blessing gets the whole kit and caboodle, right? And so Jacob on multiple occasions tries to trick Esau out of the blessing. And that's where we get to the second part, or the second meaning, the double meaning of Jacob's name. Remember the Hebrew word for heel, akeb? That's one meaning of his name. But there's another Hebrew word, akob, which means deceiver. He was always trying to trick his way. And if he couldn't earn his father's approval based on his own gifts and merits, Jacob decided that he was going to steal his dad's blessing. The story goes that when Isaac was old and knew he was about to die, he was blind at this point, and he knew it was time for him to give his final blessings to his son, Esau. And so he told Esau, go out into the field and kill my favorite game and cook for me your best stew. Bring it to me that I may bless you. And so Esau goes out in the field to hunt. But while he's out there, Rebekah, the mom, had overheard Isaac giving these instructions. And so Rebekah pulls her favorite, Jacob, to her side and says, I'm going to cook this stew. You put hairy, fur on your arms, and you're going to go in there and you're going to trick your dad and get the blessing instead. And that's exactly what happens. Jacob goes in covered in fur, and you can just imagine the poignancy of this moment. He hears words spoken to him that he's longed for, thirsted for his entire life. But he knows deep in his heart they're not meant for him, they're meant for his older brother. And after he receives this blessing from his father, then Esau comes home, makes the stew, goes in to see Isaac, and Isaac says, wait a second, I've already given my blessing to you. And that's when the ruse is found out. Esau demands, give me my blessing and give it to me instead. And Isaac says, I can't undo the blessing I gave. I'll give you a different blessing. But it's not as good a blessing as the one Jacob got. And Esau is so furious. So this stolen blessing ends up becoming a curse. Because if Jacob stays there, Esau vows he's going to kill him. And so Jacob has to take all that he has, kind of pack it up into like a little knapsack, and he has to go and find his mother's brother Laban, his uncle Laban, whom he's never met, who lives days' journeys away across the desert. He runs away from home, and he finds himself sleeping out in the desert in the middle of the night, and while he's out there in the desert, he has a vision. We call it Jacob's ladder, although the Bible doesn't say it's a ladder. What it says is that Jacob sees angels ascending and descending from heaven. And it's not the vision that's important. Rather, it's the voice he hears while he sees this vision. God says to him, know that I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and I will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. This land on which you are sleeping right now, I will give to you and to your descendants as an everlasting inheritance." And Jacob wakes up, and he builds a little altar right there to God, and he says, "Surely God, the Lord, is in this place." And this is why this is important, confirmands. Up to this point, Jacob hasn't believed in God. The only time he's used the word God, the name of God, was in the moment when he was deceiving his father. His father said, "Wow, you got this stew cooked really fast." And what did Jacob say? "Well, the Lord blessed me and gave me success." He lied. God's name was just something he could manipulate to get what he wanted. And yet in this moment, he discovers God is real and that he can have a relationship with God, and God's going to go with him wherever he goes. It changes his whole life. He goes from there and he goes to his uncle Laban's. And it turns out his uncle Laban is an even better trickster, because Jacob falls in love with his daughter Rachel, makes a promise, "I will work for you 7 years if you give me your daughter to marry." And so he works 7 years, and then he finally gets to marry the daughter, the one that he thinks he loves. But it turns out Laban did a little switcheroo and gave him his, Rachel's older sister Leah to marry. Jacob said, "I didn't want this daughter, I wanted the other one." So he has to work another 7 years to earn the right of marrying Rachel. And in that time of working 14 years, he has 11 sons. And then he again makes a deal with Laban. He says, "I'll work another 6 years to acquire a flock of my own." And Laban makes the deal with him, but then gives him the worst sheep, the puniest sheep, the ones that no one else wants, the ones that are miscolored and small and scrawny. And yet God blesses him. And Jacob's flock increases in size and strength and number, and Laban's begins to shrink until finally, this blessing that God keeps pouring out on Jacob again turns into a curse, because Laban and his sons start to get jealous. They start grumbling among themselves and saying, "Jacob has taken all that was our father's. He gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father." And they start plotting against him. And Jacob sees that Laban didn't regard him as favorably as before. He's not kind to him. He doesn't enjoy Laban's blessing. And so God says to him, "Go back to the land of your ancestors and to your kindred." And again, the key words, "I will be with you." Jacob's afraid because he knows if he tells Laban what he's going to do, Laban may not let him leave with all those sheep, with all those flocks, with all his possessions. In fact, he's worried that he won't even allow his daughters to go, that he might lose his wives, that he might lose his family. And so he leaves in the middle of the night, tries to escape under the cover of darkness. And when Laban finds out, he is incensed, he is angry. He pursues Jacob with, all of his tribesmen and clansmen. His intent is to destroy, to kill Jacob. But then God intervenes and says, "Don't do anything. Just, neither good nor bad, just leave him alone." And so the two of them make peace, and that brings us to today's story. Here's Jacob traveling back across the desert, going back home. Not because he wants to go back home, because he has no other choice. The last thing he wants to do is face up to this evil thing he did when he was a kid 20 years ago. He has to face his brother, his bigger, stronger, angrier brother, and he has no idea what his brother is going to do. And so he tries to bribe him. Before he even gets there, he sends ahead gifts to Esau. He sends ahead 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, camels and cows and donkeys, this huge gift to his brother, because he thinks to himself, well, maybe I can appease him with all of these gifts, and when I see him face to face, maybe he'll accept me instead of killing me. He even sends his wives and his daughters and all of his servants ahead, and he stays that night down by the riverside. And here's what I want you to see. This is the second time Jacob has been alone in the desert, and he's afraid, and he's vulnerable, and he doesn't know what the future holds. And for a second time, God visits him, except this time it's not with visions of angels. Instead, God comes in the form of a person, a man, who wrestles with him all night long. And they wrestle, and you can imagine this match goes on forever. And finally, as it's getting close to dawn, this man strikes Jacob in the hip so hard that it knocks the hip completely out of socket. But even in his pain, Jacob will not let go. He says, I will not let go unless you bless me. I just want you to think about that for a second. How thirsty Jacob is for blessing. I'm not going to let you go, God, unless you bless me. Think of all the blessings he's received. The blessing he stole from his brother, the blessings he's enjoyed while he served his uncle Laban. He has 2 beautiful wives, 11 great sons. He has more wealth and possessions and flocks than you could ever imagine. I mean, he has so much goodness and blessing in his life. And yet he's afraid in this moment still for what the future holds. And he says, I'm not letting go unless you bless me. And so the man says, what's your name? He says, Jacob. And then the man says, no longer shall you be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed. It's kind of a strange blessing, isn't it? Like you can imagine Jacob's going, well, that's not what I want. I want forgiveness for this bad thing I did 20 years ago. I want my brother to forgive me. I want to be sure that my wives and my children are going to be okay, that the future is going to be all right. That's what I want, God. But God doesn't promise the future to Jacob. Instead, what he promises to Jacob, what he gives to Jacob, is a new identity. Israel, that's who you are. Now remember, what did the name Jacob mean? It meant one who was grasping the heel, always trying for more. It meant one who deceived to get what he wants. And God says, that's not your identity anymore. Now your identity is Israel. And here's the cool thing about the name Israel is it has a double meaning. It can be translated 2 ways. It can be translated as one who strives with God, but it can also be translated as God strives. Meaning that as we strive with God, God strives back with us. The New Interpreter's Bible Commentary has this to say. It says, Jacob cannot struggle with God if God refuses to be so engaged. God's giving this name then has implications for God as well as for Jacob. It affirms a divine commitment to stay with Jacob in the struggle. God will be caught up in this relationship. God's promise involves not a passive presence, but an active, engaged relationship. I love that sentence. This blessing affirms a divine commitment from God to stay in the struggle with Jacob. That's what God promises, to strive with Jacob, to strive with Israel. And this wouldn't just be Jacob's new name. It would be the name that eventually his descendants would take for themselves. That one day there would be a nation called Israel. A nation of people who are striving with God in good times and in bad. In prosperity and in exile. They would strive with God, strive to know God and to follow God. And even when they failed, even when they turned away from God, God would strive with them. He would not let them go. He would not abandon them. He would continue to call them back to him. And here's what I want you to see is that we as Christians, the Bible says we are grafted into this covenant. That this heritage of striving with God is ours through Jesus Christ. We're called to be people who strive with God together. So, confirmands, here's why I chose this passage for today. I was trying to think, what blessing do I give you guys? If we're doing a series about blessing, what's my blessing for you? And I wish I could give you a blessing of rainbows and unicorns and candy canes, and life is going to be great and wonderful. It's going to be awesome, guys. God's going to bless you so much. And I thought, make that promise or that blessing. That's not the blessing I can give to you. If you look at the blessing that God gave to Jacob, it's in line with a lot of the blessings that came before him. If you go back to your Sunday school, think about Noah. What's the blessing God gave Noah? A rainbow in the sky. But it wasn't about pretty colors. God was promising to Noah, I'm not going to give you eternal sunshine, but I am going to give you the promise that any storm that comes, even the big and scary storms, even they will eventually stop. Go to Abram, who I talked about earlier, Abraham. When God said, go to the land I'm going to show you, he didn't promise, I'm going to give you clear directions. He didn't give Abraham a GPS map and say, here's the spot, and I'm going to walk you every way. Instead, what he did promise was, I'll be with you. He promised his constant presence, his protection. He promised, I will make a way for you and Sarah where you don't even see a way. I'll make the impossible things happen for you. And then to Jacob, he doesn't promise comfort and ease. Instead, he promises, yeah, you're going to strive your whole life long, but I promise you, I'm going to strive with you. And here's what I want you to see. This is the blessing I want to give you. It's really not a blessing as much as a call to strive with God. Because here's the truth. The stuff that comes cheap, the stuff that comes easy, if faith was always easy, it wouldn't be meaningful. Ask any adult in the room, the stuff you strive for, the stuff that you have to bend every effort and every ounce of your will towards, that's the stuff that matters. And God calls you to strive with him, to strive for justice, to strive for beauty, to strive for peace, to strive for understanding, to strive for hope. Life is not going to be easy. There may be times where you feel far away from God, but just know at all times and all places, God is striving with you. And when you make this commitment today that, yes, I want to strive with God my whole life long, here's the other piece of good news I can share with you. You become part of a community of people of all generations who are all striving with you to follow God, to know God, to love one another and to love Jesus the way he loves us. And it isn't always easy. It definitely isn't pretty. But the blessing is that God is present with us in the striving, now and forever. Amen.
Good morning. I am Amber Good, pastor of community engagement here at Zionsville United Methodist Church. We are the place where we hope you can find your place in God's story. We are grateful that you have chosen to worship with us today. We want to get to know you and walk with you along your journey. If you'd like to know more about us and our faith community, please visit our church website at zumc.org. There you will find the many ministry opportunities we have to offer. If you need to contact one of our staff members, all our contact information is at the bottom of each web page. You can also connect with us on social media throughout your week for daily inspiration and connection. You'll find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube under username Zionsville UMC. Once again, thanks for joining us this morning. Have a wonderful week.